episode regarding some of the sins that lead people to become temporary inhabitants of the hellfire. So these are sins that afflict many of the believers, and these are sins that we have to be cautious of on a daily basis, inshaAllah ta'ala. So we began by discussing the issues of backbiting and anything that was related to inciting backbiting. And today, inshaAllah ta'ala, we will cover the end of the subject of backbiting, as well as some of the other sins, such as riba, interest, that lead to the hellfire, wal-iyadu billah. So when does backbiting become permissible? When is it permissible to speak about someone behind their back? The scholars say there are a few instances, and these are very rare cases, but we need to mention them, inshaAllah ta'ala, for the sake of knowledge. The first is when you complain about oppression or injustice to someone who can actually help, someone who can make the situation better. For example, if someone is complaining to their local friend or imam, someone who can help, then it is fine to mention that something is happening with someone else. What about backbiting a ruler? Somebody who actually rules a country or rules a region. Now the scholars say the rulers are doing their action in public. And so therefore they are open transgressors. The Prophet ﷺ said, do not forbid people for speaking ill of the fajir, the one who is disobedient of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning publicly. They don't care. So this is something that's considered permissible. Another instance when this comes up is seeking the help of someone to correct something wrong. So you mention what is necessary and you don't go into details in order to help correct that which is wrong. The third situation, when it's sometimes permissible to backbite, meaning to mention someone behind their back or something that they're doing, is when you're asking for a specific fatwa for your situation, a specific ruling or verdict relating to your situation. This is a very limited circumstance, but sometimes it is necessary. The fourth is when you're warning a person of risk of harm. You're warning a person about the risk that they might take in dealing with this person that you are telling them about, that you're warning them about. For example, if you know that someone is about to get married, and you know that the one that they're marrying is actually in a relationship with someone else, and this person is unaware, and they're still committing that sin at the time that you know of, then you're allowed to warn this person that this person is actually guilty of something else, so you have to be careful about what you're getting into. Another situation is when someone is getting into a business transaction or a business deal with someone else. You can warn someone and say this person is not trustworthy, or you can say this person did this, this, and this in the past relating to business only, and you don't need to backbite about other matters or go into detail about other matters, only to protect someone from harm. The fifth case when it's permissible is when someone has a title that has a bad meaning, but the person is known by it. For example, one of the people of the past, he was known as the one who is blind. So this was a name that he called himself, and this is very rare. So make sure if a person has a nickname with a bad meaning, make sure that he is seriously okay or she is okay with that name being used. For example, Al-A'mash, this name meant the one who is blind. Make sure when you're referring to someone by a name such as that, that they are okay, they are fine. They don't mind you using that name, so that it's not considered backbiting, describing them in an unfortunate way. And the sixth and last one is speaking about a proud sinner. A proud sinner, someone who openly says, I do this, I do this, I do this, and the world knows about it, and social media knows about it. So you're mentioning this for a beneficial reason and not for vain speech or gossip. So you're allowed to mention that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Now don't try to justify all your backbiting under these categories, because some people will do that. They will try to find every single time they backbite that it falls into one of these categories somehow. So you have to be careful not to fall into the sin of backbiting because of how severe it is. Now, what do you do to repent from backbiting? If you backbite someone, there are at least 3 steps to repenting from that sin. The first is that if you have backbitten someone and someone that you feel would forgive you, you can go to that person and tell them, listen, I said something about you in the past and I regret it, and I hope that you would forgive me for this. Now, if you believe that by confessing you will make things worse, if you believe that by confessing you will make the matter worse, then you should not go to this person and tell them, meaning this will cause a greater fitna and a greater harm. The second thing is to seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you sincerely beg Allah for forgiveness for what you have done. You should also seek forgiveness from the one that you hurt. The third is to speak well of that person, the one that you backbit. Speak well about them in the presence of the same people that you spoke ill of them about. So the same presence, the same gathering, you said something bad about person A, You go to the same types of people later on and you say good things to restore the reputation and honor of that person. So you need to make that extra effort to go back and make sure you try your best and make sure you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness for this person. Make a lot of dua for this person so that maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you that forgiveness as well as grant them the ability to forgive you as well. Now, what are some things you can do if someone is backbiting you? Abdullah, the son of Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah, he said that once a man came to his father and he said, "Oh Abi Abdullah, I have backbitten you, so please forgive me. Oh Abu Abdullah, I said something about you behind your back, so please forgive me." So Imam Ahmad says to the man, "You are forgiven if you do not do this again. The condition is that you do not do this again." So as a da'i, as someone who's reaching out to help other people improve, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he wanted to not only forgive the person, he wanted to teach him, don't do this again. Don't fall into the same trap again. Don't fall into the same sin, the same trap of shaitan more than once. And so he told him, "I will forgive you, so don't do it again. I will forgive you if you do not do it again." So if anyone approaches us, if anyone comes to you and says, "I have backbitten you," tell them, "I will forgive you, just don't do this again." Some people came to Imam Ibn Sirin rahimahullah and they confessed that they backbit him. So they asked for his forgiveness and he responded, "As for me, I have forgiven you. But I cannot make lawful, I cannot make halal what Allah has made haram, what Allah has made prohibited." We should therefore remind those who backbite that they are infringing on the rights of the people and also on the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So forgiveness needs to be sought from both the people and from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now oftentimes backbiting will lead to a lot of unnecessary talk and gossip. So there was an interesting story from one of the scholars of the past, and this is called the story of the triple filter check. So this is the way that you check if something is useful, you filter it out. So what happens is, someone came to the scholar, one of the scholars of the past, and he said, "I want to tell you about so-and-so. Did you hear what so-and-so did? Meaning, I'm going to talk to you about someone else." The scholar said, wait right there. Is what you're going to tell me true? Is it verified? The man said, "No, I did not verify if it's true or untrue, but I still want to tell you about it." The scholar said, "No, I want to make sure you verified it." The man said, "It is not verified." He said, "How can you tell me something that you're not sure is true or false?" So the scholar said, "I have a second condition if you want to tell me this thing." The man said, "What?" He said, "Is what you're about to tell me about so-and-so, is it good? Is it something good about them? Or is it something bad that they did or something bad that someone saw them do?" The man said, "It isn't good. It's something bad." The scholar said, "How can you tell me something that is not verified to be true? And it's something bad about the individual? So it's some kind of rumor about the individual, something horrible they've done, and this is affecting their honor, and you're not sure if it's true or false?" The scholar said, "I want to ask you one more thing." The man said, "What?" He said, "Is what you're about to tell me, is the information you're about to tell me about this individual, is it beneficial for me? Is it useful for me? Do I need to know this information?" The man said, "No." The scholar said, "How then can you come and tell me something about someone else? You are unsure if it's true or false. You did not verify it. And it is not even good about the other individual. You are saying something bad about their honor. You are backbiting this individual. And it's useless to me. It does not benefit me in any way whatsoever." He said, "I don't want to hear it." And so what we're trying to point out is, if someone comes to you to backbite, you think about these 3 points right here. If the information is not good about the individual, then don't listen to it. Reject it. If the information is not even true, reject it if it's not verified. And if the information is useless, then reject it because that is a waste of your time and it is a vain speech. And the scholar recited to the man, "Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who have believed, in ja'akum fasiqun binaba'in fatabayyanu. فَتَبَيَّنُوا أَن تُصِيبُوا قَوْمًا بِجَهَالَةٍ فَتُصْبِحُوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلْتُمْ نَادِمِينَ." O you who believed, if someone comes to you, a disobedient person comes to you with information, بِنَبَأ, with information or news about someone else or something else, verify it. فَتَبَيَّنُوا, lest it causes you to harm a people, to create a fitna amongst the people out of ignorance. فَتُصْبِحُوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلْتُمْ نَادِمِينَ. So then you will become of those who are regretful for what you've done. And so this is in regards to the issue of backbiting and ghibah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from this trap of shaitan. We know that most of the people of hellfire enter the hellfire, especially the temporary inhabitants, because of the tongue, because of things that happen with the tongue, such as lying and backbiting and saying that which is untrue. So we ask Allah to protect us from this trap. Another of the traps of the inhabitants of the hellfire, who are temporary inhabitants, is the issue of consuming riba. Now we know consuming riba is a major sin. It's a big problem. It's a very problematic thing in our day and age as well. It's common in our day and age. So this is one of the sins that will lead people to the hellfire. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says very clearly, He says very directly, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَأْكُلُوا الرِّبَا أَضْعَافًا مُضَاعَفَةً وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ وَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي أُعِدَّتْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ. O you who believe, don't devour interest or riba doubled and multiplied, but fear Allah so that you can prosper. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. And Allah follows it up with what? وَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي أُعِدَّتْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ. Fear the hellfire which is prepared for those who reject faith. So according to hadith, which is authentic, the Prophet ﷺ counted riba as one of the 7 sins that will lead someone to the hellfire. So Al-Bukhari and Muslim report that the Prophet ﷺ said, avoid the 7 sins that will condemn one who commits them to the hellfire. Avoid the 7 sins that will lead a person to the hellfire. They asked, what are they, O Rasulullah? We'll mention them inshaAllah after a short break. We'll be right back inshaAllah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Praise Him every day.
Distinguished world-famous orators who dedicated their lives to convey the message of peace came together at one platform, the International Islamic Conference, with one vision, with one mission, Peace Mission.
I welcome all of you with Islamic greetings. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Peace Mission, next on Peace TV.
Praise Him every day.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before the break, we mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ spoke about riba, interest, in one of the hadith reported by Al-Bukhari and Muslim, in which he mentioned 7 types of sins, 7 types of sins that will lead a person to the hellfire. What did he say? The Prophet ﷺ said, avoid the 7 sins that will condemn one who commits them to the hellfire. So they asked, what are they, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam? He said, associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, magic and witchcraft, killing anyone whose killing Allah has forbidden except in the case of justice, consuming riba, interest, consuming the wealth of the orphan, running away from the battlefield, and slandering the reputation of innocent, believing women. Sadly, in our day and age, as of now, riba and interest is so common in the world. It is so common in the world that it becomes the norm to use interest, and it becomes difficult to find interest-free options anywhere around the world. So the financial structures are actually leading people to the hellfire because of how much shaitan has worked on his followers, on his awliya, to corrupt society, to corrupt the world. So now the issue of Islamic banks and Islamic banking, it's actually on the rise because people are seeing how beneficial it is to society and how it's actually more pure to the individual and to the corporations and to society. So if you look at the collapse of many economies, it is because of the problem of riba, of interest, which affects the rich and the poor classes, and it causes a bigger divide, and it causes people to suffer more, and we seek refuge in Allah from that. Now interest-based banks are causing this huge divide in society, and it causes the rich to become richer and the poor to become more poor. And the corporations, they benefit from this, and they continue increasing and magnifying this form of injustice. Therefore, every Muslim around the world needs to be cautious. needs to take care of this issue with finances, with homes, with mortgages. They should not shy away. They should not be shy from asking the scholars for help, legitimate scholars in the areas that they are in, about issues that they're going through and how they can get around falling into haram in regards to the riba. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from that trap of shaitan, which is so common in our day and age. Another of the sins that leads people to the hellfire is consuming the wealth of the orphans or the wealth or property of other people unjustly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ أَمْوَالَ الْيَتَامَى ظُلْمًا إِنَّمَا يَأْكُلُونَ فِي بُطُونِهِمْ نَارًا وَسَيَصْلَوْنَ سَعِيرًا. Those who unjustly eat up the property of orphans, they eat up a fire into their own bellies, and these people will soon endure a blazing fire. So consuming the wealth of other people is a major, major sin. Now this also includes consuming the people's wealth or property unjustly in regards to land or anything that they are owed that is belonging to them, meaning this is their right. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us when He says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, O you who have believed, لَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ. Do not consume one another's wealth unjustly. إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ تِجَارَةً عَنْ تَرَاضٍ مِّنْكُمْ. Except in lawful business by mutual consent. So Allah is giving us this example for a reason. The rights of another human being are sacred in Islam. The rights of every individual are highly valued in Islam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, do not consume one another's wealth unjustly. The only time you're allowed to is when there's mutual consent, meaning it's just, it's fair, because there's mutual consent. So on the Day of Judgment, people will be dealt with justice between one another. True and ultimate justice will finally take place, and nobody will be dealt with unfairly. Now we have the beautiful lengthy narration about the three men, the story of the three men in the cave. And this is, one of them is in regards to the issue of consuming people's wealth and being fair with people's rights. So Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anh reported that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, 3 men of a people before you were on a journey. And on their journey there was a storm. So during the storm they decided to go inside and find a shelter inside the cave. So as they were inside the cave, a rock or a boulder slipped down from the mountain and it blocked the exit of this cave. It blocked the exit of this cave. So what happened? So one of them said, the only way for us to be delivered is to beseech Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala using some virtuous deed. So to ask Allah to help us using some kind of good deed that we did in the past. So what happens? One of them begins to make dua and he says, Oh Allah, my parents are very old. And I used to offer them every night their nightly drink of milk before my own children and before the other members of my family. He said, one day I went far away in search of green trees and I returned only after my parents had fell asleep. When I milked the animals and I brought the nightly drink to them, my parents were fast asleep. But I didn't want to disturb them. So what did this man do? He said, I didn't want to disturb them and I didn't want to give any part of this milk to my children and the other members of my family until my parents had their share of the drink. So he said, with the vessel in my hand, I awaited until they woke up in the morning and they had their drink. And so the children cried out of hunger. His own children were crying out of hunger at his feet. He said, when my parents woke up, they had their drink. He said, Oh Allah, if I did this thing, this act of worship, seeking only your pleasure, meaning it was sincerely for your sake, then please relieve us of the distress that we have in front of us of this rock. And so they said the rock moved a little after he made this dua, but it did not move enough for them to escape from the cave. So the second man began to supplicate. He said, Oh Allah, I had a cousin that I loved more passionately than any man could love a woman. He said, I tried to seduce her repeatedly, but she would refuse constantly, until in a season of great hardship and due to famine, she approached me for help. And so I offered her 120 dinars on the condition that she would have intercourse with me. So she agreed, and when we got together and I was going to have intercourse with her, she pleaded with me and said, Fear Allah. And so he said, I became afraid, I moved away from her, despite the fact that I desired her so passionately, and I allowed her to keep the money that I offered her. Oh Allah, if I did this purely seeking your pleasure, purely for your sake, then please move us away from the distress that is in front of us of this rock. And so the rock moved a little more, but they still could not escape from the cave. And so the third man began to supplicate. He said, Oh Allah, I hired some laborers and I paid them their dues, but one of them, he left behind him something that was due to him. And I invested and the business prospered greatly. He said, after a while, the laborer came back and said, O servant of Allah, can you hand me back my wages? Meaning he came back for the thing that he had. Now remember, the man said when he left it behind, he invested it and it prospered greatly. That one thing invested was prospered greatly with. So he said, all that is yours of these camels and cattle and goats and slaves and everything else, he said, these are all for you. The man said, don't play a joke with me. I know that these are not all mine. O servant of Allah, I assured him, these are for you, I am not joking. So he took all of it, sparing nothing. O Allah, if I did this seeking only your pleasure, please relieve us of our distress. And so the rock continued to move a little further until all three of the men were able to escape from the cave. Now when we hear the story, we take some morals from the story. First, is that it is permissible to make tawassul, to ask Allah on behalf of a good deed that you've done in the past. Note that every time one of these men made dua, the condition that they put on Allah accepting their dua is that the deed was only done for His sake. So, ikhlas, having sincerity when you do something. How many things can you think of? Can you ask Allah, can you pray to Allah and say, Oh Allah, I did this purely for your sake, as these men did. Now, these people did this according to their intention, and Allah knows their intention, so He judged the deed according to that intention, and He rewarded them for it, and accepted their dua, which means that they did it purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We also learn from this hadith at least some of the types of noble deeds that we can do as believers. And one of those is honoring and looking after one's parents, and the high status they hold in Islam. The issue of parents in Islam is a very big issue. So take care of your relationship with your parents, and don't ever speak loudly over your parents. Do not ever raise your voice on them. Do not ever disrespect them or say anything ill to them, whether to their faces or behind their backs. The second type of deed that was mentioned is avoiding a sin, even in the last seconds before you can commit it. Look at the man who was about to have intercourse with his cousin, and he so passionately desired her. And yet when she mentioned fear Allah, he feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he left only for the sake of Allah. And he even allowed her to keep the wealth that he had offered her initially. So he repented to Allah, and because of his sincerity, he made dua, and Allah accepted his dua because of that. And then the third, and this is the one that we're focusing on, is the concept of consuming people's wealth. So you take care of the responsibilities and the amana that comes your way. The rights of other people are sacred in Islam. Don't ever step on or violate the rights of others. This man who had this huge garden, he had this cattle and the camel and the sheep. When the man came to him, all he really had to do was give him the wages that he was owed previously. Meaning he could have lied to him and said, here are your few wages. For example, if it was 10 dinars, he could have said, here's your 10 dinars. This is what he was owed previously. But he didn't. What did he do? So he told him honestly that the amount that he left behind previously, all he did with it was invest, and it prospered. So all of these things that he had are for that man, because that was his wages. So he said, take all of it. And so that man took all of it. He was in shock at first. He said, are you joking? But no, he said, these are for you. So he took all of it, because these are the rights of that man. So consuming the wealth of other people, you have to be careful with the rights of other people. For on the Day of Judgment, the currency is so much more severe. It is not wealth, it is not homes, it is not land. Rather, it is your hasanat and the sayyi'at. And you do not want to come on the Day of Judgment and have people's sayyi'at, sins, thrown at you, and your hasanat taken away from you. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us and to protect us from falling into these traps of the temporary inhabitants. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to elevate our status to the highest levels of paradise. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to benefit from what we hear today and every other day, insha'Allah ta'ala. This concludes our episode for today. We will continue next time, insha'Allah ta'ala, with some of the temporary inhabitants and the sins that they commit. Jazakumullahu khaira. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
Praise be to